Greetings, loyal subjects of the narrative. Welcome back to the archive. Today we do not speak of a tragic hero who falls, but of a hero who has risen so high he has forgotten the feeling of the ground. We are about to witness what happens when the embodiment of boredom is thrown into the meat grinder of the 41st millennium. Will the galaxy break him, or will he simply punch the grimdark in the face? The story begins right now. Please like and subscribe to the channel to sanctify this transmission. Chapter 1. The God yawning amidst the ruins. The sky above City Z cracked open, exposing a bleeding wound in the fabric of reality. It was not the usual dimensional breach that spewed forth generic monsters of the week, nor was it the arrival of an alien armada seeking to claim dominion over the earth. This rift pulsed with a sickly, bruised purple light, bleeding into the azure atmosphere like ink dropped into clear water. Below this celestial scar, the city lay in ruins, a sprawling graveyard of concrete and twisted steel, the aftermath of yet another catastrophe that had become as mundane as the morning weather forecast. Standing amidst the devastation was a lone figure. His yellow suit was unstained, his white cape fluttered lazily in the wind that carried the stench of ozone and pulverized stone. At his feet lay the remains of a creature that had moments ago declared itself the god of destruction. Now it was nothing more than a splatter of unrecognizable organic matter painted across 3 city blocks. Saitama lowered his fist. Steam curled from his red glove, dissipating into the cool air. He did not scream in victory. He did not pose for the drones buzzing overhead. He simply let out a long, drawn-out sigh that seemed to carry the weight of an entire universe's disappointment. The silence that followed was deafening. Just seconds prior, the air had been filled with the manic laughter of the beast and the terrified screams of the populace. Now the only sound was the rustling of a plastic grocery bag clutched in Saitama's left hand. Crinkle, crinkle. The sound was absurdly domestic against the backdrop of apocalypse. Inside the bag, a carton of eggs and a bundle of leeks remained miraculously intact. Saitama looked down at his fist, then at the gore painting the asphalt. His expression vacant, his eyes dead fish pools, reflecting nothing but profound apathy. One punch, he muttered, his voice flat, devoid of the gravelly heroism one would expect from a savior. It took one punch. Again. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. He had hoped for a fleeting fraction of a second when the monster transformed into its final form that he might feel something. A racing heart, a bead of sweat, fear anything other than this crushing, suffocating hollowness. But the result was absolute. The thrill of the fight had evaporated before it could even begin, leaving him standing alone on the peak of power, shivering in the cold winds of boredom. Far in the distance, the roar of the crowd began to swell. Sirens wailed, weaving a tapestry of noise that signaled the all clear. People were emerging from shelters, chanting the names of other heroes, the ones with flashy lasers and tragic backstories who had arrived late to the scene. Saitama turned his back on the adoration he would never receive. He adjusted the grocery bag, checking to ensure the discount sticker on the beef hadn't peeled off during the supersonic impact. I am this strong, he thought, his internal monologue echoing in the cavern of his mind. So why is my heart still as empty as my fridge at the end of the month? The question hung unanswered. He began to walk his red boots, crunching over the debris of a fallen skyscraper. The world saw a godslayer. He saw only a tedious commute home. But as he walked, the crack in the sky above did not close. Instead, it widened silently like a predator opening its maw. The static in the air grew heavier, tasting of copper and old blood, a flavor unknown to this universe. Suddenly, the wind changed. The debris stopped falling. The dust hung suspended in the air, defying gravity. Saitama paused, blinking his simple, drawn eyes. The plastic bag in his hand floated upward, tugging at his grip. For the first time all day, a flicker of genuine curiosity sparked in his chest. He looked up. The purple rift had descended, swirling into a vortex that defied the laws of physics. It wasn't just a portal. It was a hungry mouth, and it was pulling everything into its gullet. A voice, or rather a sensation of thought, projected itself from the anomaly. It wasn't the screech of a monster, but a mechanical buzzing drone like a radio tuned between stations. Subject identified. Omega potential. Retrieval initiated. The words meant nothing to him, but the gravity well that slammed into him was undeniable. Cars, boulders, and chunks of buildings were sucked into the sky. Saitama dug his heels into the pavement, not out of fear, but because he didn't want to lose his groceries. "Hey," Saitama shouted at the sky, his voice cutting through the rising howl of the wind. "I just bought these. Do you have any idea how hard it is to catch a Saturday sale?" The vortex did not care for economics. The suction increased, ripping the asphalt from the ground. Saitama felt his feet lift. He could have resisted. He could have punched the air so hard the shockwave would seal the rift. He had done it before. But he hesitated. He looked back at the city that was already forgetting him, at the mundane life that awaited him, and the same TV shows, the same watering of his cactus, the same crushing boredom. The rift above promised nothing but darkness and chaos. It looked dangerous. It looked different. Maybe, he whispered, allowing his grip on the earth to loosen. Maybe there's a guy in there who can take more than one hit. With a shrug that was more an act of surrender to curiosity than defeat, the caped Baldy allowed gravity to claim him. He floated upward, a speck of yellow and white, swallowed by the bruised eye of a foreign galaxy, clutching his leaks as if they were a holy relic, disappearing into the unknown. Chapter 2. The Rift in Reality. The transition was not instantaneous. It was a nauseating slide through a tunnel of kaleidoscope lights, ending with a metallic thud that vibrated through the soles of Saitama's boots. He did not land in a crater this time. Instead, he found himself standing on the polished, sterile deck of a starship that hummed with a frequency just on the edge of human hearing. The air here was recycled, tasting of antiseptic and cold electricity, a sharp contrast to the dust and pollution of City Z. Saitama stood up, dusting off his knees, and immediately checked the plastic bag in his left hand. Disaster had struck. The carton of eggs, subjected to gravitational forces that would have spaghettified a normal human, had succumbed. A yellow, gooey mixture dripped sorrowfully from the bottom of the bag, forming a small puddle on the pristine alien floor. Saitama stared at the mess, his face draining of color, a look of genuine horror etching itself onto his features, an expression far more intense than anything he had worn while fighting the monster earlier. "My Saturday special?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "I didn't even get to make an omelet." Around him, the bridge of the exploration vessel Xenon 4 erupted into chaos. The crew's slender beings with elongated limbs and oversized obsidian eyes scrambled over their consoles in a panic. Alarms blared, a rhythmic, piercing shriek that grated on the nerves. They had abducted a specimen for study, expecting a primitive, carbon-based life form. Instead, their sensors were screaming that a localized gravitational singularity had just manifested in the middle of their command deck. Security drones dropped from the ceiling, their weapons charging with blue plasma. Specimen unsecured lethal force authorized the translation software barked from the ship's speakers. Beams of superheated energy lashed out, converging on the bald head of the intruder. The air sizzled. Smoke billowed. When the ventilation systems cleared the haze, Saitama was still standing there, furiously wiping egg yolk off his white cape with a handkerchief. The plasma beams hadn't even singed his eyebrows. He looked up, his expression shifting from tragic loss to mild annoyance. "Hey," he said, pointing a gloved finger at the terrified captain. "Do you guys have a mop and maybe a refund policy?" The alien captain did not answer. It couldn't. At that moment, the ship shuddered violently, a groan of tortured metal that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in the teeth. The view screen, which had been displaying the star-streaked void, suddenly shifted. The stars didn't just blur, they bled. The darkness of space was replaced by a churning, impossible storm of violets, crimsons, and sickly greens. It wasn't a nebula. It was a bruise on the skin of the universe, pulsing with a heartbeat that sounded like a billion screaming voices. The ship's navigational computer began to vomit error codes. They had not calculated the mass of the entity they had beamed aboard. Saitama's presence, an anomaly of infinite density, disguised as a human, had destabilized the ship's warp drive. They weren't moving through space anymore. They were tearing through the curtain of reality. The laws of physics, usually so rigid and comforting, began to melt. The walls of the ship started to breathe. The floor rippled like water. Gravity shifted sideways, sending the alien crew tumbling into the bulkheads. Saitama floated a few inches off the deck as gravity gave up the ghost. He looked around, puzzled. This wasn't like the telekinetic attacks he was used to. This was messier. A crew member near him screamed, but the sound didn't come out as a noise. It manifested as a cloud of moths that fluttered away into the ventilation shafts. Another crew member simply unraveled, turning into a ribbon of mathematical equations that dissolved into the air. "This is getting weird," Saitama noted, swatting a moth away from his face. He tried to walk, but his foot found no purchase. The geometry of the room was folding in on itself. A corridor that should have led to the exit now led into a mouthful of jagged, crystalline teeth. The voices in his head grew louder, not the ship's intercom, but whispering, rasping voices that promised power to spare and eternal pleasure. "Let us in. Let us in," they hissed. Saitama picked his ear with his pinky finger. "You guys are really noisy," he grumbled. "Is this a haunted house theme park? It's a bit much." The hull of the Xenon 4 finally gave way. It didn't explode in a ball of fire. It was simply unmade. The metal skin of the ship peeled away, like dead skin dissolving into the roiling energies of the warp outside. Saitama found himself drifting in the Empyrean, a sea of raw emotion and psychic energy, where matter was a suggestion, not a rule. Most mortal minds would have shattered instantly upon witnessing the naked warp. Their souls would have been flayed, their sanity consumed by the neverborn. Saitama just felt cold. He floated in the cross-legged position, clutching his bag of ruined groceries, looking out at the madness. Giant, impossible shapes moved in the distance, whales made of starlight demons, the size of planets, engaging in eternal slaughter. Directly ahead of him, the storm swirled into a massive, singular eye. It was ancient, malevolent, and it was looking directly at him. It was a gaze that had broken gods and shattered empires. Saitama stared back, blinking. The cosmic horror pressed against his mind, trying to find a crack, a fear, a desire to exploit. It found only a wall of indifference, smooth as marble. "Hey," Saitama called out into the void, his voice carrying perfectly in the vacuumless realm. "That hole. Why is it looking at me? It's kind of rude to stare." He raised a fist threateningly. "Keep looking and I'll poke you." The warp did not answer, but the turbulence around him intensified, dragging him deeper into the nightmare, towards a destination where logic had long since died. Chapter 3. The Omega Digital Machine. Consciousness returned to Saitama not with a gasp, but with the groggy irritation of someone waking up 5 minutes before their alarm. His senses were immediately assaulted. The air was thick heavy with the cloying scent of burning incense and the metallic tang of old recycled oil. It didn't smell like a hospital. It smelled like the inside of a car engine that hadn't been serviced in 40 millennia. He tried to rub his eyes, but his arms wouldn't move. They were pinned heavy and unresponsive, encased in something cold and rigid. System cycle initialization, a voice droned, not a human voice, but a static-laced rasp that sounded like a speaker grinding against gravel. Biolink established. Spirit-machine interface unstable. Saitama cracked one eye open. He was suspended vertically in a glass cylinder filled with amber amniotic fluid. Through the distortion of the liquid, he saw a cavernous chamber that looked less like a laboratory and more like a cathedral dedicated to the worship of gears. Gothic arches made of rusted iron stretched up into darkness, and the floor was a maze of cables pulsing with dim rhythmic light. Robed figures moved below him, their movements jerky and unnatural chanting in a monotone stream of numbers. 010. Praise the motive force. 101. The fluid drained away with a sickening gurgle, and the glass cylinder hissed open, retreating into the ceiling. Saitama stumbled forward, his knees buckling under a weight he wasn't used to. He wasn't wearing his yellow suit. Instead, his body was plugged into a massive skeletal framework of ceramite and plasteel, an unfinished suit of power armor that looked more like a torture device than protection. Thick, black cables were jacked directly into the base of his skull and along his spine, pulsing with data transfer. Standing before him was a nightmare of metal and flesh. The figure wore red robes that hid most of its body, but what was visible was horrifying. Where a face should have been, there was a cluster of glowing green lenses and a grill for a mouth. Several mechanical mechadendrites, metal tentacles tipped with drill saws, and scanners writhed from its back like angry snakes. This was Magos Biologist 7 Row, and he was currently staring at Saitama with the cold, calculating disappointment of a programmer looking at a syntax error. Subject Omega the Magos chattered the sound of a dot matrix printer underlying his words. Cognitive functions active. Muscle density, illogical. Warp exposure, significant. Yet the machine spirit within you is dormant, silent. The Magos tapped a data slate with a metallic finger. Disappointing. Saitama blinked, trying to shake the grogginess from his head. He looked down at the wires sticking out of his chest. Hey, he said, his voice echoing in the vast, silent chamber. You got a permit for all this wiring? It looks like a fire hazard. He tugged at a thick cable connected to his shoulder. And who are you calling Subject Omega? My name is Saitama. I'm a hero for fun. The Magos froze. The mechadendrites behind him stopped their writhing and pointed accusatorily at the bald man. Hero, the word, was foreign, distasteful to the tech priest's logic banks. Irrelevant data. You are a biological chassis, a vessel for the Omnissiah's wrath, but your performance metrics are abysmal. The Magos floated closer on anti-grav suspensors, his lenses zooming in and out. I have run the diagnostics 3 times. Your psychic resonance is 0. Your tactical subroutines are non-existent. Efficiency rating 0.01%. Conclusion: a waste of sacred biomass. Recommendation: recycle components for servitor conversion. Recycle. Saitama scratched his head, or tried to, but his hand was encased in a heavy metal gauntlet that made a loud clank against his skull. Look, buddy, I don't know what you're talking about with this biomass stuff. I just want to know where the nearest supermarket is. I lost my wallet in that purple hole. In that... He stepped forward, and the tension on the cables reached its limit. The Magos raised a metal claw to stop him. Halt. You are not authorized to disconnect. The decoupling ritual takes 4 hours of prayer and... Snap. Saitama didn't wait. He simply walked. The thick cables reinforced to withstand the thrashing of a gene-bulked monster popped like cheap rubber bands. Sparks showered the floor. The monitors lining the walls exploded in showers of glass as the feedback loop overloaded the system. The chanting servitors in the background stopped mid-binary, their simple minds unable to process the sudden interruption of the data stream. The Magos recoiled, his optical sensors widening in what might have been shock if he were still capable of human emotion. Impossible, the tech priest screeched, his voice modulating into a high-pitched whine. Those connections were fused to your nervous system. You should be in agonizing pain. You should be incapacitated. Saitama stood free of the machine, trailing broken wires like a bridal train of garbage. He rolled his shoulders, hearing the satisfying pop of his joints mixed with the whine of the heavy servo motors attached to his limbs. He looked at the heavy metal plating bolted to his chest and legs. It was crude heavy and smelled of incense. It kinda pinches a little, Saitama admitted, picking at a rivet on his forearm. But I've had mosquito bites that hurt worse. He looked around the dark, grim factory, seeing rows of half-assembled cyborgs and vats of green goo. So, I guess I'm not in City Z anymore. You guys have a really weird interior design sense. Very industrial goth. Chapter 4. The Godly Workout. The training cages of the fortress monastery were a symphony of violence. Here the air did not just smell of sweat. It reeked of hormonal aggression, gun oil, and the copper tang of blood spilt in friendly sparring. Towering figures clad in scout armor or training fatigues moved with blurring speed, their enhanced muscles coiling like steel cables. These were the neophytes and the initiates, the future angels of death, honing their bodies to become weapons of the Emperor. And then there was Saitama. He stood in the center of the arena, looking like a lost child who had wandered into a wolf den despite being encased in the heavy unpainted ceramite prototype armor. The suit was bulky, his movements stiff. Around him, the Astartes stopped their drills. They stared. Rumors had spread about the anomaly dredged from the warp, a biological curiosity that the Magos claimed held Primarch-level potential. But looking at the bald man picking his nose with a metal gauntlet, the warriors saw only a joke. Attention! The bark of the drill's sergeant, a scarred veteran with a bionic eye, cut through the noise like a chainsword. He marched up to Saitama, shoving a heavy Godwin-pattern bolter into his chest. The weapon was massive, capable of blowing a normal human in half with a single shot. This is your life, initiate. It is the Emperor's wrath made manifest. Fire at the target. Do not miss. Saitama held the gun awkwardly, like it was a wet fish. He looked at the distant target, a reinforced slab of plasteel. It's kinda heavy, he muttered. He squeezed the trigger. Boom. The recoil was enough to dislocate a mortal shoulder. The bolt round obliterated the target, blowing a hole through the wall behind it. The sergeant nodded, impressed despite himself. Good? The recoil compensation was too loud. Saitama interrupted, dropping the sacred weapon onto the concrete floor with a careless clatter. The sound of the holy gun hitting the dirt made several neophytes gasp in horror. And it vibrates too much. My hands feel fizzy. I don't like it. I'll just use my fists. The sergeant's face turned a shade of apoplectic purple. You discard the holy bolter. You dare mock the armory. He stepped closer, towering over Saitama. If you do not wish to shoot, Then you will suffer. Drop and give me 500 standard repentant push-ups. Now, let us see if your muscles are as loose as your tongue. Saitama blinked. Push-ups. His eyes lit up for the first time since arriving in this grim dimension. Oh, now you're speaking my language. He dropped to the floor. The heavy servo motors of his armor whined in protest. The other Astartes chuckled. Push-ups were a warm-up for them, a triviality. They expected the anomaly to collapse under the weight of the prototype plating. One Saitama counted. He lowered himself. Crack. The solid rockcrete floor beneath his hands spiderwebbed instantly. 2. Boom! With the second rep, the floor didn't just crack, it depressed. A shockwave of air blasted outward from his position, blowing dust into the eyes of the watching Marines. The chuckles died in their throats. 3. The entire training hall shook. Dust fell from the vaulted ceiling high above. The sergeant took a step back, his bionic eye whirring as it tried to calculate the force output. It wasn't just physical strength. It was an impossible application of kinetic energy. Saitama wasn't struggling. He was moving with a terrifying rhythmic casualness. Up, down, up, down. With every repetition, the crater beneath him grew deeper, and the shock waves grew more violent. 42. Saitama droned, sounding bored. The armor on his back was groaning, the servos sparking as they tried to keep up with a speed that defied their mechanical limits. He wasn't being aided by the suit. He was dragging the suit along for the ride. Stop, in the name of the throne, stop, the sergeant yelled, realizing that his training floor was being structurally compromised. Get up to the track, the running track. Saitama stood up, dusting off his hands. The armor was smoking. I was just getting to the good part, he complained. They moved to the track, a 10-kilometer loop designed for endurance testing. Run, the sergeant commanded, until you collapse. The neophytes took off, sprinting at speeds that would shame a cheetah. They were post-human demigods bred for war. Saitama stood at the starting line, adjusting his boots. Then he vanished. There was no sound of acceleration, just a sudden gust of wind that knocked the sergeant over. A blur of yellow and gray whipped past the sprinting Marines, lapping them once, then twice, then 10 times. On your left, Saitama said flatly as he passed the lead runner for the 15th time. He wasn't panting. He wasn't sweating. His face remained a mask of utter neutrality. He looked like a man jogging to catch a bus, yet he was moving fast enough to create a sonic boom inside the enclosed arena. The glass windows of the observation deck shattered. 5859, Saitama muttered as he ran, counting kilometers instead of steps. High above in the shadows of the observation deck, the tech priest watched the monitors. The readouts were flatlining, not because the subject was dead, but because the sensors couldn't scale high enough. Strength immeasurable. The Magos whispered his logic, coils trembling. Dexterity clumsy. Attitude insolent. But the output? By the Omnissiah. The output. Saitama stopped at the 100-kilometer mark, skidding to a halt and ruining another stretch of flooring. He turned to the breathless, awe-struck Marines who were barely halfway through their run. So, Saitama asked, patting his stomach. Is it lunchtime yet? I'm starving. Chapter 5. Brothers of Iron. The barracks were an austere affair, a cavernous hall of gray metal and dim lumens that smelled of unwashed bodies, gun oil, and the lingering copper scent of the training cages. There were no personal effects here, no posters on the walls, no televisions blaring the evening news. Just rows of hard slabs for sleeping and a long metal table where the aspiring angels of death refueled their biological engines. Saitama sat at the edge of the table, staring down at the ration bar in his hand. It was a block of dense beige matter wrapped in wax paper. It looked like a brick of compressed sawdust, and if his taste buds were to be believed, it tasted even worse. He took a bite, chewed methodically, and swallowed with a grimace. "It has the texture of an eraser," Saitama commented to the air, though the table was full of eating soldiers. "And the flavor of old socks. Is this really what you guys eat every day?" Even the discount bento at the convenience store had a pickle in it. A young neophyte sitting across from him, a boy named Kalen, whose face was already mapped with scars from the training pits, looked up. His eyes were hard, but there was a flicker of curiosity in them. "It is corpse starch initiate, enriched with proteins, vitamins, and the recycled biomass of the fallen. It is fuel. Taste is a luxury for the weak." Saitama stopped chewing. Recycled biomass. He looked at the half-eaten bar, then at the neophyte. "You mean people I'm eating people?" He slowly placed the bar back on the table, pushing it away with his index finger. "Okay, I'm done. I'm suddenly on a diet." The other neophytes chuckled a low, humorless sound. They were used to the grim realities of the Imperium. To them, recycling the dead was an act of efficiency, a necessity on a world that was nothing but a factory for war. But to Saitama, who worried about expiration dates on milk, it was a step too far into the grotesque. A heavy dragging sound interrupted their meal. From the shadows of the service corridor, a figure shuffled into the light. It was vaguely humanoid, but its humanity had been butcherously excised. Half of its skull was replaced by a crude metal cogitator unit. Its right arm had been amputated at the elbow, replaced with a rotating scrubbing brush that whirred softly. Its eyes were gone, replaced by glowing red optical sensors that stared at nothing. The creature moved with a mindless, jerking rhythm, scrubbing a stain on the floor where someone had spilled water. It did not breathe. It did not blink. It simply existed to clean. "Whoa," Saitama said, leaning forward. "Check out the cyborg. Is he new? He looks like he fell into a pile of spare parts and just kept walking." He waved a hand at the creature. "Hey buddy, you missed a spot over there." The creature did not react. It continued its programmed path, the brush grinding against the metal floor. Scrape. Whir. Scrape. "That is not a buddy." Kalen said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The amusement in the room vanished, replaced by a heavy, uncomfortable silence. "That is a servitor. A monotask construct." "A robot?" Saitama asked. No, Kalen shook his head, his eyes fixed on the creature with a mixture of pity and revulsion. Biological. It was once a man, maybe a criminal, maybe a heretic, maybe just someone who failed the selection process one too many times. The tech priests. They take the mind. They scrub away the soul, the memories, the personality. They leave only enough brain matter to process simple commands. Then they bolt the machinery onto the flesh. Saitama looked back at the servitor. He saw the drool leaking from the slack corner of its mouth. He saw the scars where the metal fused with purple, irritated skin. It wasn't a machine built to look like a man. It was a man hollowed out to become a machine. The horror of it wasn't in the gore, it was in the absolute erasure of dignity. "That's terrible," Saitama said softly. In his world, monsters were clear. They had claws, they destroyed cities, and you punched them. But this was a monster, made of bureaucracy and cruelty. Why didn't they just build a robot? Why do this to a person? "Iron mines are heresy," another neophyte muttered, making the sign of the Aquila. "The machine must have a human soul to be sanctioned, even if that soul is broken." Kalen leaned across the table, his intense gaze locking onto Saitama. The young warrior's hands were trembling slightly, not from fear of battle, but from a deeper existential dread. Brother Kalen whispered the word, feeling strange on his tongue as he addressed the anomaly. "You are strong, stronger than anything I have ever seen. But out there, on the battlefield, things happen." He swallowed hard. "If I fall, if my mind breaks, if I am too damaged to serve as a Marine but not dead enough to burn." He gestured vaguely at the shuffling servitor. "Don't let them take me to the tech priests. Do not let them turn me into that." Saitama looked at Kalen. He looked at the other young men around the table. They were children really forced to grow up too fast in a universe that hated them. They weren't afraid of dying. They were afraid of losing their humanity. Saitama picked up the corpse starch bar again. He didn't eat it, but he crushed it in his hand, the dry material turning to dust. "Don't worry," Saitama said, his voice flat but carrying a strange weight of promise. "I'm not really good at the whole soldier thing, but I'm pretty good at protecting people." He looked Kalen in the eye. "Nobody is turning you into a vacuum cleaner while I'm around. If you die, I'll make sure you stay dead. It's the least a hero can do." It was a grim promise, a dark comfort. But in the flickering light of the 41st millennium, it was the closest thing to hope Kalen had ever heard. Chapter 6. The Field of Fire. The descent was not a majestic flight. It was a controlled crash. The Thunderhawk gunship screamed through the atmosphere of Acheron Prime, shaking violently enough to rattle teeth loose from gums. Inside the hold, the red tactical lights bathed the squad in a bloody gloom. The Astartes were statues of prayer and focus, checking bolters and combat knives. Saitama sat strapped in his harness, looking like a bored commuter on a particularly bumpy subway ride. "Is there no in-flight movie?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the roaring thrusters. "Or maybe some peanuts?" No one answered. The ramp slammed down before the ship even touched the ground, revealing a world that had been set on fire. The sensory assault was immediate and physical. The air was a toxic soup of burning promethium ozone and the copper stench of vaporized blood. The sky was choked with black smoke, blotting out the sun lit only by the streaking contrails of drop pods and the flash of orbital bombardments. And then there was the noise. It wasn't just the boom of artillery. It was a roar. A guttural, primal, endless scream that seemed to come from the very throat of the planet. Wah, "Deploy! Deploy! Purge the Xenos!" The sergeant's voice was a thunderclap over the voxcaster. The squad surged forward, a wedge of ceramite and bolter fire. Saitama stumbled out after them, his heavy boots sinking into mud that was suspiciously red. Before him lay a trench line that stretched to the horizon, currently being overrun by a green tide. Orcs. They were mountains of muscle and bad attitude, wielding axes made of rusty gears and guns that shouldn't work but did. They didn't use tactics. They used mass. They poured over the barricades like a landslide of flesh, chopping, shooting, and biting. Saitama stood still, blinking. In his world, monsters usually introduced themselves. They gave speeches about world domination or evolution. These things just screamed and killed. He watched a space marine, a giant of a man, who had lifted a tank in training, get swarmed by 5 smaller greenskins. They tore at his armor with crude claws, finding the weak points, dragging him down into the mud. "Hey," Saitama muttered, raising a hand as if to call a timeout. "That's not fair play. It's 5 against 1. A stray rocket, propelled by sheer orc belief and questionable engineering, spiraled erratically through the air and slammed squarely into Saitama's chest. Kaboom! The explosion engulfed him in a ball of fire and shrapnel. The sergeant, engaging a knob with his chainsword nearby, glanced over, expecting to see a crater where the anomaly had stood. The smoke cleared. Saitama was still standing. The chest plate of his prototype armor was blackened and cracked, revealing the pale skin underneath, but there wasn't a scratch on him. He coughed, waving the smoke away from his face. "This suit is really cheap quality," he complained, brushing off a piece of burning metal. "It's ruining my clothes underneath." He looked around. The reality of the war hit him then. It wasn't a fight. It was a meat grinder. Bodies were piling up, human and alien alike, forming a grotesque rampart. There was no glory here, just noise, dirt, and death. "Move, you idiot." A massive armored hand grabbed Saitama by the shoulder plate and yanked him sideways, just as a massive revving buzzsaw slammed into the space he had occupied. The sergeant stood over him, his helmet torn off, to reveal a face masked in blood and grit. He decapitated the attacking orc with a brutal swing of his chainsword, the weapon screaming as it bit through bone. "Do not stand there and critique the armor." The sergeant roared, spitting a glob of blood onto the mud. "This is not a simulation. Fight or get out of the way." Saitama looked at the sergeant. He saw the exhaustion in the veteran's eyes, the sheer desperation of holding the line against an infinite enemy. He looked past the sergeant and saw Kalen, the young neophyte from the mess hall, firing his bolter, wildly terror etched onto his young face as a massive orc with a metal jaw charged him. I don't want to kill anyone," Saitama said, his voice unusually small amidst the carnage. "I'm a hero. Heroes fight monsters, not armies." "Then you are in the wrong universe, little god," the sergeant snarled, turning back to the fray. "Here there is only war. Stand up, Primarch, or scrap you die on your feet. If you want to be a hero, save your brother." He pointed towards Kalen. The boy had run out of ammo. The massive orc raised a crude heavy axe, ready to split the neophyte in two. Kalen froze, staring death in the face, his promise to not become a servitor flashing before his eyes. Saitama felt something twitch in his chest. It wasn't the thrill of battle. It was that annoying, nagging feeling he got when he saw someone bullying a kid. The apathy that coated his soul like oil began to crack just a fraction. "Fine," Saitama sighed, the air around him suddenly growing heavy. One punch, just to clear the air. Chapter 7. The First Punch. Time seemed to stutter. For Kalen, the universe had narrowed down to the rusted, serrated edge of the orc's axe, descending towards his skull. He could smell the creature's rancid breath, a mixture of fungus beer and rotting meat. He didn't close his eyes. A space marine looks death in the face. He just tightened his grip on his empty bolter, preparing to die for the Emperor. Then the world turned yellow. It wasn't a flash of light, but a sudden intrusion of a primary color into the drab grays and browns of the battlefield. Saitama was there. He didn't appear with a crack of thunder or a warp jump. He simply stepped between the axe and the neophyte, moving with a speed that bypassed the eye's ability to track. He looked bored. His red glove was raised not in a guard, but in a casual swatting motion. "Get lost," Saitama said. The axe blade, a slab of metal weighing as much as a motorbike, struck Saitama's forearm. Physics dictated that the limb should have been sheared off. Instead, the weapon shattered. The metal disintegrated into shrapnel as if it had struck an immovable diamond pillar. The orc knob blinked its tiny red eyes, widening in confused comprehension. It had never hit something that didn't break. Saitama didn't give it time to process the anomaly. He drew his right arm back. It wasn't a perfect martial arts stance. It was the posture of a man annoyed by a persistent mosquito. He punched. The impact didn't make a wet thud. It made a sound like a cannon firing point blank inside a cathedral. Crack-thum. The orc didn't fly backward. It simply ceased to exist from the neck up. The force of the blow atomized the alien's head and upper torso, instantly turning bone and thick green muscle into a fine, expanding mist. But the punch didn't stop there. The kinetic pressure wave erupted from Saitama's fist, visible as a distorting cone of air. It tore through the ranks of the orcs behind the dead knob. A dozen greenskins were lifted off their feet and hurled backward, their armor crumpled like tin foil. The shockwave carved a trench through the mud, stripping the earth down to the bedrock for 100 meters. The rain, which had been falling in a steady drizzle, was blasted away, leaving a perfectly dry tunnel of air hanging over the battlefield for a long, silent second before nature dared to rush back in. Kalen sat in the mud, staring blankly. He was covered from helmet to boots in sticky black-green ichor. He looked up at the back of the yellow-clad figure standing before him. Steam was rising from Saitama's glove. The red cape fluttered in the aftershock wind. Saitama looked at his fist. He opened and closed his fingers, testing the joints. A small frown tugged at the corner of his mouth. Huh, he grunted, ignoring the carnage he had just wrought. That felt a little different. In his own world, everything felt like punching wet tissue paper. Here, the orc's skull had offered a microsecond of resistance. It was faint, barely registerable, like popping a slightly thicker bubble wrap. But it was there. Maybe it's the gravity, Saitama mused aloud, wiping a speck of green alien blood off his cheek. Or maybe these green guys are tougher than the deep sea folk. Still, one punch. He sighed, the brief flicker of excitement dying out as quickly as it had come. I was hoping for a combo. Throne of Terra. The sergeant lowered his chainsword. He had seen orbital bombardments. He had seen dreadnoughts tear apart tanks. But he had never seen a biological entity generate that kind of directed kinetic force with a bare limb. The orcs, usually driven by a mindless lust for war, had paused. Their primitive brains were struggling to categorize this new threat. It wasn't a shooty thing. It wasn't a choppy thing. It was a crumpen thing of the highest order. High above in orbit aboard the command ship, Magos biologist 7 Row stared at his cogitator's screens. The data slate in his mechanical hand cracked under the pressure of his grip. Energy spike detected, the Magos chattered, his voice oscillating with digital reverence. Physical output exceeded standard Astartes parameters by 5,000%. No psychic residue, no warp manipulation, pure, raw kinetic heresy. The red lights on his faceplate pulsed. Designation update. Subject Omega is not a failure. He is a weapon of mass destruction in human skin. Back on the ground, the silence broke. The orcs, recovering from their shock, did the only thing they knew how to do. They roared. If anything, the display of violence had only made them more excited. A bigger fight meant more glory. Baldi. The green tide surged forward again, climbing over the remains of their vaporized leader. Saitama cracked his neck. He looked back at Kalen, who was still trembling on the ground. Saitama offered a hand, a gauntleted hand that had just liquidated a monster. "Hey, kid," Saitama said, his voice cutting through the roar of the oncoming horde. "You got any soap? This green stuff is really sticky. It's going to be a pain to wash out." He turned back to the charging army, raising his fists in a sloppy boxing stance. "All right. Everyone form a single file line. No cutting." Chapter 8. The Emperor's Eyes. The war was over, at least for the moment. The battlefield was a distant memory, replaced by the sterile humming silence of the apothecarion aboard the strike cruiser Sword of Truth. Saitama lay on a bioscan table, shirtless, wires and sensors plastered all over his chest and bald head. He looked less like a patient, more like a science experiment gone wrong. Heart rate 45 beats per minute. Steady Medica's servitor droned its metal claw, adjusting a dial. Dopamine levels non-existent. Adrenaline trace amounts. Subject appears bored. Saitama stared at the ceiling. "Can I go now?" he asked, trying to scratch an itch on his nose, but his hands were restrained by adamantium cuffs. "I'm telling you, I'm fine. That explosion just singed my cape a little. I don't need a checkup." Silence, a hooded figure in the corner hissed. It was not the Magos, but someone far more dangerous, an inquisitor of the Ordo Hereticus. He watched Saitama with eyes that saw sin in every shadow. "You are an anomaly. You punched a hole in the air. You possess the strength of a Primarch, but the soul of a peasant. Until we determine if you are a miracle or a demon host, you do not move." Saitama sighed, closing his eyes. "Fine, I'll just take a nap. Wake me up when dinner is ready." He didn't expect to sleep. But the moment his eyelids shut, the darkness didn't come. Instead, the world twisted. The smell of antiseptic vanished, replaced by the scent of burning circuitry and ancient dry dust. The hum of the ship was drowned out by a screaming choir of 1,000,000,000 souls dying in unison. Before we witness the meeting between the One Punch Man and the Master of Mankind, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep the Astronomicon lit. Saitama found himself standing on a golden floor that stretched into infinity. But it wasn't beautiful. It was terrifying. The gold was tarnished, covered in the ash of millennia. The air was hot, scorching enough to boil blood heavy with a psychic pressure that would have crushed a space marine into paste instantly. "This is a weird dream," Saitama muttered, shielding his eyes. Dominating the horizon was a mountain of machinery, a Gothic nightmare of pistons, gears, and Gothic arches. And at the summit, seated upon a throne that was also a life support engine, sat him. To the faithful, he was a god. To Saitama, he looked like a skeleton screaming in silence. A withered, desiccated corpse wrapped in golden armor, connected to thousands of thrumming cables that fed him the souls of psychers to keep the lights on. Yet despite the physical decay, the presence emanating from the figure was overwhelming. It was a sun, a blinding golden star of pure will that held back the dark tide of the universe. "But you, the voice didn't make sound. It exploded inside Saitama's skull like a grenade. It wasn't spoken. It was impressed upon reality. Saitama winced, rubbing his temples. "Hey, keep it down. You don't have to shout inside my head." The golden figure did not move, but the light intensified. The Emperor of Mankind looked down at this intruder. He saw everything. He saw the broken limiter. He saw the infinite well of potential. He saw the banality of the man wielding it. Plus, a weapon without a trigger, a sword without a hilt. "Why are you here?" "Anomaly." "I didn't ask to be here," Saitama retorted, looking up at the giant corpse god. "I was just buying groceries." Then a purple hole ate me. Now everyone is trying to shoot me or worship me. I just want to go home. Plus, home is gone. Reality is fracturing. I sit here dying for 10,000 years to hold the nightmare back. I burn 1,000 souls a day just to keep the door closed. And you play at being a hero. The image shifted. Saitama was forced to see what the Emperor saw. He saw the galaxy not as stars, but as a fragile island of light surrounded by a hungering ocean of claws and teeth. He saw the Tyranids consuming worlds. He saw the Necrons waking up. He saw the laughter of the Chaos Gods. He felt the crushing weight of trillions of lives depending on this one rotting skeleton. For the first time, Saitama felt small. Not weak, never weak, but small. His strength was physical. He could punch a meteor. He could punch a planet. But this was a burden of responsibility that no punch could solve. You can't punch the concept of species extinction. You're holding all that up, Saitama asked, his voice losing its usual indifference. By yourself, for that long. Plus, there is no one else. My sons are dead or lost. The tools are broken, and now fate has thrown a wild card onto the table. You. The psychic pressure focused into a single point, drilling into Saitama's eyes. Plunt, are you a savior, or are you just another monster I must destroy, Bao? Saitama straightened his posture. The glare of the Emperor was painful, like staring into a welding torch, but he didn't look away. I'm just a guy who's a hero for fun, he said. Then he paused. But, looking at you, it doesn't look like much fun being a god. The vision shattered. Saitama gasped, jerking awake on the table. The restraint snapped like wet paper. The Inquisitor and the guards raised their weapons, instantly startled by his sudden movement. Sweat poured down Saitama's bald head, not from heat, but from the sheer intensity of the encounter. He is awake. The Inquisitor barked his hand, hovering over a button that would vent the room into space. Speak, mutant. What did you see in your sleep? Why were you glowing? Saitama sat on the edge of the table, his breath coming in slow, heavy rhythms. He looked at his hands. They were trembling slightly. I saw a really tired old man, Saitama whispered, his gaze distant, and a really, really big job. He looked at the Inquisitor, his eyes hardening. The boredom was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. I don't know about your war, Saitama said quietly. But nobody should have to carry a burden that heavy alone, not even a god. Chapter 9. Mission Impossible. The Strategium was a cold circular room dominated by a massive holographic table. Here, the lives of millions were reduced to flickering red icons and casualty percentages. The air smelled of ozone and expensive cologne, a stark contrast to the mud and blood of the front lines. Lord General Vance, a man whose uniform was more gold braid than fabric, stood over the map swirling a glass of amasec. Saitama stood before the podium, flanked by Sergeant Kargas and the neophyte Kalen. They were still covered in the filth of the trenches. The general didn't even look at them. He was too busy admiring the tactical display of a sector being consumed by a warp storm. The situation is critical. Vance said, his voice smooth and detached. The rift is expanding. We have lost contact with the Archaeotech relay on Moon 7. There is a data core there. It contains the coordinates for a crusade route. He sipped his drink. It must be retrieved. So Saitama interrupted, picking at a piece of dried mud on his elbow. You want us to go into that spinning purple blender, grab a USB stick, and come back? Sounds like a fetch quest. Is there a reward? Maybe a coupon for a hot bath? The general's eye twitched. He slammed his glass down. This is not a game. Subject Omega. The radiation levels in that zone would liquidate a tank in minutes. The demonic presence is absolute. It is a zone mortalis. Zone mortalis, Saitama repeated. Does that mean death zone? You guys really need to work on your naming sense? It's very on the nose. It means, Sergeant Kargas interjected, his voice gravelly and respectful, that it is a one-way trip, Lord General. You are asking us to die. I am asking you to serve Vance. Corrected cold-heartedly. The data is worth more than 1,000 space marines. Your lives are the currency of the Emperor. Spend them well. Saitama looked at the general, then at the map. The little red dots representing their destination were surrounded by swirling skull icons. It wasn't a mission. It was an execution with extra steps. I refuse, Saitama said flatly. The room went deadly silent. The scribe servitors in the corner stopped scratching their quills. Kargas stiffened. "Refuse, Vance," whispered, his hand drifting towards the bolt pistol at his hip. "Refusal is mutiny. Mutiny is heresy. If you refuse, I will have your squad purged right here. I will have this boy." He pointed a manicured finger at Kalen, flayed alive as a traitor. Kalen flinched, his face pale. I will go, my lord. I am ready to die." See, Vance sneered. "The boy understands duty. Why don't you monster?" Saitama stepped forward. The heavy thud of his boots on the marble floor sounded like a gavel striking a sounding block. He didn't radiate killing intent. He didn't glow. He just looked at the general with eyes that were terrifyingly empty of fear. "You misunderstood me." Saitama said, his voice dropping an octave. "I refuse the dying part. I'm not letting you throw them away like trash." He reached out and took the mission scroll from the table. He crumpled the wax seal in his hand, crushing the symbol of the general's authority into dust. "We'll get your data," Saitama said, tossing the crumpled paper back at the general. "But listen closely, Fancy Pants. If these two don't come back with me, if they get so much as a paper cut because of your bad intel, I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to punch this entire station into the sun." The hangar bay was a hive of activity, but the corner where Saitama's team prepared was quiet. Kargas was checking his bolt gun for the 10th time. Kalen was reciting the litany of protection, his voice trembling slightly. "You shouldn't have threatened him," Kargas rumbled, slotting a magazine into his weapon. "Vance is powerful. Even if we survive the warp, he will have us executed for insubordination." "Let him try," Saitama said, adjusting the oversized pauldrons of his armor. "I'm getting really tired of people threatening me. It's very repetitive." He looked at the young neophyte. "Hey kid, stop shaking. It's just a walk in the park. A very weird, purple, demon-infested park." "We are walking into hell," Brother Kalen whispered, looking at the black assault ramp of the transport ship. "Then stay close to me," Saitama said, walking up the ramp. "Hell hasn't met me yet." The hydraulics hissed, sealing them inside the darkness of the ship. The engines roared to life, carrying them away from the safety of the station and towards the bleeding wound in the sky. Chapter 10. Illusions in the Storm. The transition into the warp storm was not like entering a cloud. It was like being swallowed by a fever dream. The interior of the assault transport dissolved. The metal bulkheads, once solid adamantium, began to weep blood. The tactical lights overhead elongated into screaming mouths. Gravity ceased to be a constant and became a suggestion, shifting wildly so that down was sometimes the ceiling and sometimes the inside of one's own stomach. Saitama stood in the center of the hold, gripping a handrail that had turned into a spinal column. Beside him, Kalen was curled into a fetal ball, clutching his helmet, chanting the litany of protection so fast it sounded like a continuous hum. Sergeant Kargas was firing his bolter at shadows that danced on the walls, phantoms of his past failures, ghosts of brothers he had let die. "It's just a turbulence," Saitama said, trying to steady his footing as the floor rippled like liquid mercury. "You guys are overreacting. It's like a really cheap roller coaster." But then the ship vanished. Saitama was falling. There was no ship, no Kalen, no Kargas. There was only a kaleidoscope tunnel of impossible colors that tasted like lemon and smelled like betrayal. He landed not with a thud, but with a splash onto a surface that looked like a mirror stretching infinitely in all directions. He stood up. The reflection beneath his boots did not mimic his movements. Instead, the Saitama in the mirror remained seated, grinning up at him with a mouth full of shark-like teeth. Finally, the reflection spoke. The voice didn't come from the ground. It echoed from inside Saitama's own skull. "Just the two of us. No nagging cyborgs, no screaming soldiers, just the void. Saitama looked down. Great, another weirdo. Are you the manager of this place? I have a complaint about the ride. The reflection stood up slowly, stepping out of the glass as if it were water. It was Saitama, but wrong. Its skin was pale violet, its eyes burned with a chaotic, shifting fire, and the cape was not white, but a tapestry of flayed skin. I am you, the entity hissed, circling him. The real you. The one who is bored. The one who prays for a monster strong enough to survive one punch. You don't care about saving that boy. You don't care about the Imperium. The doppelganger stopped leaning in close, its breath smelling of ozone and old blood. You are an addict, Saitama. You are addicted to the fight. You let cities crumble just to see if the villain has a final form. You are not a hero. You are a monster looking for a playmate. Saitama blinked. His expression didn't change, but his fist clenched slightly at his side. The words were not an attack on his body. They were a surgical strike on his apathy. Is that what you think, Saitama asked, his voice low. It is what you know. Well, the chaos Saitama laughed, a sound like glass breaking. Join us. Korn offers you an eternity of battle. Slaanesh offers you the sensation of feeling something again. Why save the weak when you can slaughter the strong? The doppelganger lashed out. It threw a punch. For the first time in years, Saitama didn't see the attack in slow motion. It was fast. It was matched perfectly to his own speed. He caught the fist in his palm, the impact creating a shockwave that shattered the mirror floor for miles around. The force of the blow pushed Saitama back an inch. Just an inch. But that inch was a revelation. You're strong, Saitama admitted, looking at the vibrating fist in his hand. I am your desire, the clone roared, pushing harder, the chaotic energy flaring. I am the part of you that wants to let go. Let the galaxy burn. Give us a real fight. Saitama looked at the twisted version of himself. He felt the temptation. A world of endless war. A world where he didn't have to hold back. It was exactly what he had thought he wanted. But then a memory flashed in the chaotic storm. Not a memory of a great battle, but of a small, trembling hand holding a discount coupon. Of Genos frantically writing down his wisdom. Of Kalen, the terrified boy in the mess hall who just didn't want to become a robot. Saitama's grip tightened on the clone's fist. The bones of the entity began to crack. You're wrong, Saitama said, his eyes shadowing over. I am bored. I am looking for a fight. He pulled his other fist back. The air in the warp dimension screamed in anticipation. But being a hero isn't about what I want. It's about making sure the other guys get to go home for dinner. He punched. It wasn't a serious punch. It was a punch of denial. A rejection of the selfish nihilism the warp offered. Crash! The chaos doppelganger didn't explode. It shattered like a stained glass window. The shards of the mirror world flew apart, dissolving into harmless mist. The screaming laughter of the dark gods was silenced by the sheer blunt refusal of a man who simply didn't care for their philosophy. The world spun violently. Saitama blinked, and he was back in the transport ship. He was holding Kalen by the collar. The neophyte had been about to open the airlock, his eyes rolled back in his head, drooling madness. Snap out of it, Saitama said lightly, slapping the Marine's helmet. Kalen gasped, air rushing back into his lungs as the madness receded. The walls of the ship turned back to metal. The storm outside raged, but the interior was stable. Brother? Kalen wheezed, terror lingering in his eyes. I saw eternity. Yeah, I saw it too, Saitama said, letting him go and walking back to his seat. It was just a guy talking to himself in a mirror. Pretty boring. Let's get that data stick and go home. Chapter 11. The fall of the giant. The assault ramp of the transport hissed open, but no fresh air rushed in to greet them. Instead, the smell hit them like a physical blow, a humid, rotting stench of spoiled meat and ancient sulfur. They had landed on the demon world of Zaltath. Saitama stepped out first, his boots sinking inches deep into the ground. He looked down, expecting mud. Instead, the surface beneath him was a vast, undulating carpet of gray fibrous muscle. It pulsed rhythmically, a planetary heartbeat thumping against his soles. "Gross," Saitama said, lifting a foot. A string of viscous, clear slime clung to his boot before snapping back. "The ground is sweaty." "Why is the ground sweaty?" Sergeant Kargas and neophyte Kalen followed, weapons raised their helmet autosenses, screaming warnings. "Do not look at the sky," Kargas warned, his voice tight. "Focus on the objective. The Archaeotech spire is 3 clicks north. Move." They moved across the living landscape. The environment was a mockery of nature. Trees made of fused bone clawed at the air, their leaves whispering lies in forgotten tongues. Rivers of boiling bile cut through the flesh plains. And above the sky was not a void of stars, but a ceiling of shifting, weeping eyes that tracked their every movement. "I feel heavy," Kalen gasped, his movement sluggish. "My armor. It feels like it weighs 1,000 tons. "It is the warp," Kargas grunted, firing a burst of bolter rounds into a patch of shadows that tried to grab his leg. "It weighs on the soul, not the body. Keep your mind armored in faith, boy. Deny the witch." Saitama walked ahead, swatting away flies the size of crows. He didn't feel the spiritual weight. He just felt annoyed. "Can we hurry up? I think this planet is trying to digest my shoes." They reached the objective, a spire of black metal jutting out of the ground like a broken rib. But standing between them and the data core was a figure that defied description. It was immense, towering over the Space Marines. At one moment, it looked like a knight clad in armor of brass and blood. The next, it was a swirling vortex of razors. Then a beast with 1,000 maws. This was Vorax, a demon prince, of the ruinous powers, the lord of this nightmare realm. "Welcome, little flesh things," the demon spoke. Its voice was the sound of bones breaking. "You bring me a tasty soul, and something else." It turned its eyeless helm towards Saitama. A blank page, a void in the script. "I'm not a page," Saitama said, stepping forward. "I'm the guy who's going to punch you if you don't move." "Punch," Vorax laughed. The sound caused the flesh ground to ripple violently, knocking Kalen to his knees. "You think physics applies here. You think force has meaning in the realm of dreams." Saitama didn't waste time on banter. He launched himself forward. It was a movement that should have bridged the distance instantly. He threw a normal punch aimed squarely at the demon's chest. It should have ended there. The shockwave should have vaporized the entity. But nothing happened. Saitama's fist stopped an inch from the demon's armor. Not because he pulled the punch, but because the space between them suddenly stretched into infinity. The harder he pushed, the further away the target became. It was like running in a nightmare where the hallway never ends. What Saitama blinked, his fist hovering in the distorted air. "Here will is reality," Vorax sneered. "And your will is weak. You have no passion, no hatred, no faith. You are just a bored man swinging a meat stick." The demon flicked a claw. It didn't touch Saitama, but a wave of telekinetic force slammed into him. For the first time in recent memory, Saitama was flung backward. He tumbled across the fleshy ground, crashing through a bone tree. He stood up, brushing dirt off his cape. He wasn't hurt, his durability was absolute, but he was confused. "I missed. How did I miss? He was right there." Kargas roared, opening fire. Die, abomination. The bolt shells flew true, but moments before impact, they transformed into swarms of locusts that scattered harmlessly against the demon's armor. Your weapons are useless, Vorax bellowed, raising a massive sword that burned with black fire. I am the master of this story. I decide who hits and who misses. The demon prince lunged, closing the distance to the space marines in a blink. Kargas drew his chainsword, parrying the blow with a shower of sparks, but the sheer weight of the attack drove him into the ground. Run, Kargas shouted at Kalen. Get the data, I will hold him. Saitama watched, his brow furrowed. He clenched his fist again. He tried to summon that feeling of absolute power, but the air felt thick, like he was punching underwater. The reality of this world was rejecting him. It was a cheat code he didn't know how to bypass. This is annoying. Saitama muttered, frustration bubbling up. Not the thrill of a fight, but the irritation of a game that glitches. Why won't you just break? Chapter 12. The Price of Power. The battle was not a duel. It was a slaughter. Sergeant Kargas was a veteran of 100 campaigns, a warrior who had faced orcs, tyrannids, and traitors without flinching. But here, against a creature woven from the nightmares of the galaxy skill, meant nothing. Vorax moved like smoke. Kargas swung his chainsword, the teeth screaming as they bit into empty air. The demon prince laughed, a sound that caused the very blood in the sergeant's veins to boil. Your faith is hollow, little soldier, Vorax hissed, materializing behind the space marine. You fight for a corpse on a chair. I fight for the eternal truth of chaos. Saitama scrambled to his feet, mud and gore dripping from his cape. Hey, pick on someone your own size, he shouted, launching himself again. He threw a punch, a serious one this time, aiming to shatter the demon's spine. But the air warped again. The distance stretched. Saitama's fist punched through a vacuum, the kinetic energy dissipating harmlessly into the warp. He was running on a treadmill of distorted reality, inches away, but miles apart. I told you, Vorax sneered, not even looking at Saitama. Here intent matters more than force. And you are just watching. You are a spectator. The demon raised its massive brass-clawed hand. It didn't use magic this time. It used brute-crushing strength. It caught Kargas's chainsword mid-swing and snapped the adamantium blade like a dry twig. Then, with a casual brutality that was shocking in its simplicity, Vorax backhanded the sergeant. Crunch! The sound was wet and heavy. It wasn't the metallic clang of armor. It was the sickening noise of ceramite bone and organs being crushed simultaneously. Kargas was flung across the clearing, skipping like a stone over the fleshy ground before slamming into the base of the black spire. He didn't get up. No, the shout didn't come from Saitama. It came from Kalen. The neophyte abandoned the data core, rushing towards his fallen leader. But Saitama was faster. The shock of the violence, the sheer unglamorous reality of it, shattered the apathy that had clouded his mind. For a microsecond, his want to be there overpowered the warp's tricks. He blurred, appearing instantly beside the sergeant. Kargas was a ruin. His chest plate was caved in a crater of twisted metal and bubbling blood. His helmet was shattered, revealing a face that was gray and rapidly losing the spark of life. One eye was swollen shut. The other stared blindly at the weeping sky. Saitama knelt, his hands hovering, unsure of what to do. He could punch planets. He could jump to the moon. But he couldn't fix this. He didn't have a punch that could reverse death. Sergeant. Saitama stammered, his voice losing its usual monotone detachment. Hang on. I'll carry you. We can find a doctor or a tech priest. Kargas coughed a spray of dark blood, coating Saitama's white cape. The sergeant's hand, trembling and weak, reached up and gripped Saitama's wrist. His grip was surprisingly firm, the last reserve of a dying will. "Don't be..." Stupid, Kargas rasped, blood bubbling between his teeth. "My watch is ended." The sergeant turned his head slightly, looking past Saitama at Kalen, who was weeping openly. Then he looked back at the bald man, who possessed the power of a god, but the mind of a grocer. You are strong," Kargas whispered, struggling for every breath. "But strength without purpose is just violence." The demon prince approached slowly, savoring the despair. The sky darkened, the weeping eyes bleeding tears of black oil. "Look at him," Vorax mocked. "Broken, useless, just meat for the grinder." Kargas ignored the monster. He focused his fading vision on Saitama. "Your fist, it can kill anything. But don't let it be the only thing that lives for you. Protect the boy. Protect." The grip on Saitama's wrist tightened one last time, then went slack. The sergeant's head lulled to the side. The chest stopped heaving. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. Saitama stared at the dead man. He looked at the hand that had just let go. It was a rough hand, scarred and calloused. The hand of a man who had fought not for fun, not for a challenge, but because he had to. Saitama slowly lowered the sergeant's arm to the ground. He stood up. He didn't scream. He didn't rage. His face went completely blank. The comical, simple features that usually defined him, the round eyes, the oval head, seemed to sharpen. Shadows cast by the warp storm darkened his sockets, turning his eyes into abyssal pits. The air around him stopped moving. The flies dropped dead mid-flight. The fleshy ground ceased its pulsing heartbeat. "You said something about intent." Saitama spoke. His voice was no longer a human sound. It was a tectonic plate shifting deep underground. It was low, flat, and terrified the very air it traveled through. He turned to face Vorax. "You said I was just watching." Saitama continued, taking one step forward. The ground beneath his boot disintegrated into nothingness. "You were right. I was playing a game." He raised his fist. There was no flash of light, no wind up. Just a sudden, terrifying sense of finality. Game over. Chapter 13. One Punch Man returns. The demon prince Vorax felt something he had not experienced since his mortal days thousands of years ago. It was a cold, sharp sensation in the pit of his stomach. It was fear. The air around the bald human wasn't just vibrating, it was screaming. The laws of the warp, the fluidity of time and space that Vorax controlled, were crystallizing. The dream was freezing over. "You think?" Vorax stammered, his voice losing its thunderous reverb. "You think you can strike me? I am a prince of the Neverborn. I am eternal." He summoned the full power of the storm. The sky collapsed. A vortex of black lightning, screaming souls, and reality-dissolving acid swirled into a spear of ultimate destruction. It was an attack that could crack a planet in half. He hurled it at the small, yellow-clad figure. Saitama didn't dodge. He didn't block. He simply pulled his right fist back. His posture shifted. The slouch was gone. The boredom was gone. In their place was the stance of a warrior who had broken his limiter. "Killer move, Sirius Series," Saitama whispered. The words were quiet, but they resonated with more authority than the Emperor's own decree. He stepped into the oncoming storm of magic. The black lightning struck his chest and fizzled out like a static shock. The acid rain evaporated before it touched his skin. He was an anchor of absolute reality. in a sea of madness. Serious punch. He threw the fist. It wasn't just a physical impact. It was a rejection of the warp. The punch carried the weight of a universe that obeyed law's gravity-friction consequence. It hit the space in front of him, and the fabric of the dimension shattered. A beam of pure compressed air pressure so dense it glowed white-hot erupted from Saitama's knuckles. The spear of dark magic disintegrated instantly. The beam continued striking Vorax. There was no scream because there was no time to scream. The demon prince's armor, forged in the hell forges of the warp, turned to dust. His flesh, woven from nightmares, was atomized. His soul, bound to the chaos gods, was torn apart by the sheer kinetic violence of the strike. Impossible was the last thought that flickered through the demon's mind before he was erased from existence. But the punch didn't stop there. The beam carved a tunnel through the atmosphere of the demon world. The weeping clouds were blown away. The eyes in the sky were blinded. The shockwave hit the horizon and split the clouds globally, revealing the true starry void of space behind the warp storm. Silence returned to Zaltath. The fleshy ground had stopped pulsing. It was now just dead gray matter calcified by the shock. The wind was gone, sucked away by the vacuum of the punch. Saitama stood in the center of a canyon that hadn't existed 10 seconds ago. His cape was tattered, blowing in the settling dust. Steam poured off his entire body, his skin flushed red from the exertion. He slowly lowered his fist. He took a deep breath, exhaling a cloud of white vapor. "Die," he said softly to the empty air where the monster had stood. It wasn't a curse. It was a sentence. Behind him, neophyte Kalen lay on the ground, shielding his eyes. The boy looked up, trembling. He expected to see a monster. He expected to see a god of war. Instead, he saw Saitama scratching the back of his neck, looking down at his gloves. "Aw, man." Saitama muttered, his voice returning to its usual flat tone. "I got demon guts on my favorite gloves. This is never gonna wash out." Saitama turned and walked over to Kalen. The neophyte flinched, terrified by the sheer presence of the man. But Saitama just reached out and hauled him to his feet with a gentle tug. "Come on, kid," Saitama said, pointing his thumb over his shoulder at the cleared sky where their extraction ship could now land. "Grab the USB stick. Let's go home." "But the sergeant..." Kalen choked out, looking at the broken body of Kargas. Saitama paused. He looked back at the fallen soldier. His expression softened, a flicker of genuine sadness crossing his face. "We can't save everyone," Saitama said quietly, "but we can make sure they didn't die for nothing. You're alive. That means he won." He bent down and picked up Kargas's shattered chainsword. "We'll take this. A souvenir. To remember him." As the extraction ship descended through the hole Saitama had punched in the storm, the One-Punch Man didn't look back. He had faced the abyss, and for the first time in a long time, the abyss had blinked. Chapter 14. Facing the Throne. Holy Terra. The Throne World. To a trillion souls, it was the center of the universe, a holy site of pilgrimage and prayer. To Saitama, standing on the landing platform of the Imperial Palace, it looked like a really crowded city that needed a good power washing. The air tasted of incense and old parchment. The sky was filled not with birds, but with cherub cybernetic babies fluttering on anti-grav wings. Creepy Saitama muttered, watching a cherub fly past carrying a skull. "Why is everything here made of skulls? Do you guys get a bulk discount?" He was not in chains this time. He was escorted by the Adeptus Custodes, the golden guardians of the Emperor. These were warriors who made space marines look like clumsy children. They towered over Saitama, their auramite armor gleaming, their guardian spears humming with lethal power. They did not speak. They did not trust him. But the master of mankind had summoned the anomaly, and the custodes obeyed. They walked for hours. They passed through the Eternity Gate, a portal so massive that rain clouds formed near its ceiling. They walked past the Hall of Heroes, where the statues of saints looked down in judgment. Finally, they reached the Sanctum Imperialis. The doors opened. The psychic pressure hit Saitama like a physical wall. If he were a normal man, his mind would have been flayed, his soul turned to ash. Even the custodes bowed their heads against the gale of power. Saitama just leaned forward slightly, like walking into a strong wind. "The heater is definitely broken in here," he commented, shielding his eyes from the blinding golden light. "It's boiling." Inside, the machinery was deafening. Pistons the size of skyscrapers pumped coolant. Thousands of tech priests scurried like ants, replacing burnt-out fuses. And in the center atop a mountain of gold and machinery sat the Golden Throne. Saitama looked up. He didn't see a majestic god. He saw a corpse. A skeletal figure, jaw wired shut, missing an eye skin stretched like dry parchment over ancient bone. The Emperor of Mankind sat in eternal agony, his psychic scream echoing across the galaxy to light the Astronomicon. "Plus, you have come." While the voice did not move the air, it stopped the heart. It was the sound of a star dying. Saitama stood before the throne, hands in his pockets. He didn't kneel. The Captain General of the Custodes tensed, ready to strike this insolent heretic down, but a psychic command froze him in place. "Yeah, I'm here," Saitama said, looking at the rotting figure. "You wanted to see me. You look worse than in my dream. You really need to eat something. Maybe a banana. Plus, I do not eat. I sustain. I am the Carrion Lord. I devour souls to keep the night at bay." Plus, the mental image shifted. Saitama was forced to see the reality of the Emperor's existence. He felt the pain of 1,000 psychers dying every day to feed the throne. He felt the constant gnawing hunger of the Chaos Gods scratching at the door. He felt the crushing loneliness of a father whose sons had betrayed him. Plus, I look at you, Anomaly, and I see a paradox. You have infinite power, yet no ambition. You could rule the stars, you could crush chaos, yet you worry about coupons. It was a really good sale, Saitama defended himself. Half off hot pot beef. He looked at the Emperor, his expression shifting from casual to serious. "Look, old man, you talk about saving everyone, but you're just sitting here suffering. Is it worth it? Plus, it is necessary. Plus, the psychic voice was heavy with 10,000 years of regret. Plus, if I stand, humanity dies. If I die, humanity dies. I am the anchor. I trade my agony for their survival. That is the duty of a god." Saitama scratched his head. "Sounds miserable. In my world, we have heroes. They fight, they win, they go home. Sometimes they lose popularity polls, but they don't eat people." He took a step closer to the throne, ignoring the warning hum of the machinery. "I'm not a god," Saitama said. "I'm just a guy. But I know this, if you have to sacrifice your humanity to save humanity, did you really save it?" The Emperor remained silent. The golden light dimmed slightly, casting long shadows in the throne room. For a moment, the psychic scream softened into a low hum. "Plus, Octurer, you are naive, but your strength, it is pure. It is untouched by the warp." Parsed Ralph. The Emperor's presence enveloped Saitama, analyzing every cell of his body. "Plus, I cannot command you. You are outside my design, but I can offer you a path. The galaxy is breaking. The great rift widens. My armies are failing. I'm not joining your army, Saitama interrupted. I don't like uniforms, and I hate taking orders. Plus, I do not ask for a soldier. I ask for a cleaner. An image appeared in Saitama's mind, vast hive fleets of Tyranids consuming worlds. Necron tomb worlds awakening to purge all life. Orcs burning entire sectors. Puans, there are monsters out there that my sons cannot defeat. Things that laugh at physics and logic. Go, find them, punch them, be the independent variable in my calculus. Plus, Saitama thought about it. He remembered the fight with Vorax. It was annoying, but for a second, just a second, he had felt useful. He remembered Kalen's face when he saved him. So Saitama said, cracking his knuckles, "You want me to be a freelancer, a hero for hobby, in space? Plus, call it what you will. Just do not break my Imperium while you are at it." Saitama turned to leave. He stopped at the massive doors and looked back at the rotting corpse god. "Hey," Saitama called out. "If I find a way to fix this whole situation," he gestured to the throne in the grimdark misery, "I'll let you know." Nobody deserves to sit in a chair that uncomfortable forever. For the first time in millennia, a ripple of something resembling amusement echoed in the warp. Plus, go one punch man. The galaxy awaits your fist. Plus, Chapter 15. The hero wanders the stars. The high orbit docking spire of Terra was a cathedral of steel floating in the void. Thousands of ships, from massive battle barges to small pilgrim shuttles, moved in a chaotic dance of commerce and war. On the primary observation deck, a ceremony was underway. Servitors sang hymnals, incense smoke curled around Gothic pillars, and a retinue of high lords and inquisitors stood in rigid formation. They were there to honor the Saint of the Fist, the avatar of kinetics, the Emperor's anvil. Saitama stood at the center of it all, looking incredibly uncomfortable. He was back in his yellow suit, which had been repaired by the fabricator general himself using sacred archaeotech weaves. It looked exactly the same as before, much to the Mechanicus's confusion. Subject Omega Lord General Vance intoned, bowing low. "The Council has deliberated. We offer you the rank of War Master. You will lead the Indomitus Crusade. You will have a legion of Astartes at your command. Entire sectors will bow to your name." Saitama picked at his ear. "Pass," he said simply. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a tank. Vance blinked. "Pass you. Refuse. You refuse the power to shape the galaxy." "Too much paperwork," Saitama explained, waving his hand dismissively. "And I'm not good at speeches. Besides, if I have an army, I'll just end up sitting in a chair watching them fight. That sounds boring." He turned away from the stunned nobles and walked towards the small, ugly frigate docked at the end of the platform. It was a salvage ship, blocky and scarred, painted a dull gray. It was the only ship he had asked for. "I'll take this one," Saitama said, patting the hull. "It's got a microwave and a bed. That's all I need." Before he could board, a voice called out, "Wait." Saitama turned. Standing there was Kalen. The boy was no longer a trembling neophyte. He wore the full power armor of a space marine, freshly painted in the colors of his chapter. At his hip hung the shattered remains of Sergeant Cargus's chainsword, now a relic of honor. Kalen didn't bow. He walked up to Saitama and stood tall. The fear was gone from his eyes, replaced by a steely resolve forged in the fires of the warp. "You are leaving," Kalen stated. "Yeah," Saitama said. "This place, it's too crowded, and everyone keeps trying to pray to me. It's weird." "Where will you go?" "Out there," Saitama pointed vaguely at the stars. The Emperor guy said there are monsters that need punching. And I heard rumors of a planet made entirely of chocolate. I'm going to check that out first. Kalen smiled a rare human expression in a grim future. He extended a hand. It wasn't the handshake of a subordinate, but of an equal. "We will hold the line here," Kalen said. "I will not let the sergeant's sacrifice be in vain. I will fight for the living, not just the dead." Saitama took the armored hand. He didn't crush it, he shook it gently. "Good," Saitama nodded. "Don't die, kid. And if you see a guy with a metal jaw and a bad attitude, duck." Saitama turned and walked up the ramp. The hatch hissed shut, sealing him inside his solitude. The engines of the salvage ship, which he had hastily scrawled, "The sail hunter on the side of," coughed to life. It was an ugly sound, sputtering and wheezing, a stark contrast to the elegant hum of the Imperial fleet. The ship detached, drifting away from the golden light of Terra. Inside the cockpit, Saitama sat in the pilot's chair. He placed a small cactus he had found in the palace gardens on the dashboard. "All right," he said to the empty room. "Let's see what this universe has to offer." He punched the throttle. The ship didn't enter the warp. It simply accelerated, propelled by engines that Saitama had fixed by punching them until they worked better. As Terra faded into a speck of light behind him, Saitama looked out at the infinite darkness. For the first time, it didn't look empty. It looked like a to-do list. Tyranids, Necrons, Chaos. Saitama listed off the names he had heard. They sound like a hassle. But he clenched his fist. A small smile played on his lips. Maybe one of them can take a punch. Epilogue: The Shadow in the Void. Deep in the intergalactic void, far beyond the light of the Astronomicon, a shadow was moving. It was not a ship. It was a swarm. Trillions of biological organisms, a hive fleet of impossible size, were drifting towards the Milky Way. They were the Great Devourer. They had consumed galaxies. They knew no fear, only hunger. The hive mind, a consciousness spanning billions of light years, suddenly recoiled. It felt something approaching. A single solitary signal was burning a path towards them. It wasn't a fleet. It was one biological unit. The signal didn't feel like prey. It felt like a predator. Inside his cockpit, Saitama saw the endless wall of alien flesh on his radar. He didn't turn back. He didn't call for backup. He put on his gloves. Finally, Saitama said, the engines roaring as he accelerated straight into the maw of the swarm. Some exercise. Thank you for watching this legendary journey. The story of the one-punch Primarch has only just begun. If Saitama were to fight Khorne, the god of blood, do you think the Chaos God would survive? Or would he just become red mist? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more grimdark crossovers. The Emperor protects, but Saitama punches.